It's Thanksgiving week, and I was getting ready for the broadcast this morning, and somehow got lost in this idea that it was going to be like a really mellow day because it's the Monday of Thanksgiving week, right? Wrong. I have 10 items on my list to discuss with all of you today. Things have not gotten any quieter since last week. I wish there was some way to say that we were on the downslope to things becoming a tad more mellow. It just really doesn't feel like that. I'm personally kind of pretty disappointed at this point that we haven't seen a little bit more of a denouement. And it feels like, every other night right now, there's enormous breaking news stories that in any other kind of environment would be crushing an entire administration or the career of a congressperson or the career of a senator. But, or the energy secretary. In any event, there's a lot to talk about today. And, I also just want to flag I guess, is the sort of initial topic for today that, Adam Schiff did give interviews yesterday on the Sunday talk shows where he made clear that the timetable that we're currently on is pushing toward an impeachment vote. So, it may be, as he said yesterday, that there may be additional witnesses who may testify. I will remind you all, again, I feel like I can't say this enough. There can be consecutive articles of impeachment. There is no one-shot deal to this process. So, where we find ourselves at the moment, at least from what Schiff is signaling and signaled yesterday, is that we're going to get back from the Thanksgiving recess and there will be a vote on impeachment in House Judiciary and then as well on the floor of the House. So, that's the timetable we're on right now. I am of the opinion, everyone I'm talking to, everyone I read is of the opinion that there's more than enough evidence from a legal standpoint at this point to make out a case. I said last week I would take this case to trial in a heartbeat. I think that from where we are at the moment, it's obvious that that's the next logical step. So with all that said, over the weekend, we had a mountain of breaking news that, either some of which is plainly a distraction, some of which is quite serious, some of which is kind of a combination of both. So now that I've got my list of 10 in front of me, let's just go through some of the bits of breaking news that we learned about this weekend with some of your questions as well. So first things first, we learned over the weekend that the president is basically working out of the White House residence now. He's not even bothering to go over to the West Wing. This is very strange in light of the fact that as of today, we are on day 9 since that weird run to Walter Reed without any real information about the why, the diagnosis, or what took place. It is all at this point kind of like rank speculation. There was some video last week of him using the back stairs at Air Force One. There's been a fair amount of reporting elsewhere in the media from neurologists about the nature of what happens in one's body when one is in rapid descent to dementia. That includes things, by the way, like falls where your arms don't come up to stop you automatically because your brain and your body are not working well together. That's very layperson's language. Sorry, I mean no disrespect, but I've read a fair amount about this over the weekend, and some of the very serious concerns right now are that his dementia has advanced to the point where the symptoms of what we are seeing are going to become increasingly hard to hide, and that may explain why he's in the White House residence rather than in the West Wing. It may also, by the way, explain why he's using the tiny little steps at the back of the plane instead of the big ones at the front. But again, all of this is speculation. And one of the things that I have been particularly concerned about is that we really have not seen a lot of follow-up on this from the major media. There are, of course, like HIPAA regulations and requirements with regard to disclosure of information, but something's really off here. And from the standpoint of our national security, compromise potential, as well as, who's in charge of our nuclear arsenal, there's a lot that needs to be known here that isn't. And there's a lot about this that smacks of cover-up. The little things that we're sort of seeing out there in the public domain are concerning enough. The fact that we are not getting any kind of public statement from the White House beyond like this weird phased annual physical weirdness is odd and concerning. I mean, I don't want to downplay how concerning it really is, because it is. So, the fact that he's working from bed, the other thing I'm just going to mention here is that, there are weird historical parallels from this, right? Like bunkers that past fascist dictators worked out of in the waning days of their power. And, I'm not the only one to point this out. There's just very, very strange things happening. And, from the standpoint of our own observance, we should pay attention to it. Okay. We also learned over the weekend, again, it's crazy to believe all this stuff happened on a Saturday and a Sunday. We learned that the House Intelligence Committee is in possession of video and audio tapes of Rudy Giuliani with Lev Parnas, discussing, presumably, the Ukraine situation. One of the things that it has become very clear over the last few days is that Lev Parnas appears to be cooperating not only with federal investigators, but also with the Intelligence Committee. And, from where we sit, we don't know what's on those tapes, but that should kind of scare the pants off of Rudy Giuliani, who, by the way, was on Twitter all weekend saying he's not afraid of anything, and then also saying really crazy things about having insurance policies against the president and RICO spreadsheets. And, they're all nuts at this point. And, one of the things that I just want to say about that is extinction bursts are not just for the president. They're also for any person who's cornered right now who feels that they may be in legal jeopardy. One of the things that, I just want to say about all of this is that, again, we can't speculate about what's on those tapes. I personally am very interested in hearing what's on those tapes. I think we all will be. I am way more interested at this point, though, in Lev Parnas getting under oath. And one of the reasons that I'm also interested in that is because of another breaking news story that happened late on Friday night and that carried over through the weekend about the fact that Devin Nunes, apparently, according to Lev Parnas's lawyer, met with Lev Parnas in Europe in a hidden trip that he kept kind of off the books, that he took his staffers to, about the potential of investigating this conspiracy theory on Ukraine interfering in the 2016 election. One of the things that, should obviously disturb everyone about this is how it is that Devin Nunes didn't recuse himself from everything that's been happening in the impeachment hearings about Ukraine, because potentially, by the way, this makes him a fact witness. If what he was doing was engaging in a portion of this particular conspiracy with regard to trying to get Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 election on the basis of all of this, he's a fact witness, if not a potential co-conspirator. So, I had my own moment of caution about this on Friday night for the following reason, which I just want to make clear to all of you. It is clear that one of the things that Lev Parnas is engaged in right now is trying to plead out against this indictment that is pending against him in the Southern District of New York. The only thing that I just want to flag here is that Lev Parnas has made it very clear throughout the duration of his life that he will kind of sell out anybody or anything to save his own skin. Until he is under oath and actually testifying against the president, against Rudy Giuliani, against Devin Nunes, it's worth our while to just have a momentary spate of caution about this. The tapes certainly add another layer to this with regard to Giuliani. But let me just say this. I personally had just a kind of like ex-litigator's intuitive hit about this on Friday night that was basically like, there's a little edge to this that sounds like he'll say anything to try to get a plea. Now, those of you who will remember our whole discussions about Rick Gates and Paul Manafort know that there's this process usually when you're pleading out, which is called Queen for a Day. Those of you who have watched for a while may remember this, where basically if you are trying to plead out, you come in for a day, you confess to literally everything that you know about. No holds barred, no limitations. And assuming that you do that, you will not be prosecuted for all the information that you share in the context of that plea agreement. This also, by the way, is a part of one of the things that's called proffering, which is, you make a proffer of what you could testify to against various people as a part of there are formal processes for doing this in court, but also, by the way, you can make a proffer to a prosecutor about what you're likely to testify to against other co-conspirators or other defendants. So one of the things I'm just a little wary of right now with regard to Parnas is that he's playing the game that you need to play when you're trying to plead out and get your own ass off the line. And, I have a moment, just simply because of the credibility of the people that we are dealing with, of wanting to say, let's wait to see what he testifies to under oath. Let's also wait to see what these tapes that are now in the possession of intelligence with regard to Giuliani and Parnas actually contain. Because it's one thing to have your lawyer out there saying he's willing to testify to X, Y, and Z. It's quite another thing to actually have him testify under oath, subject to a perjury prosecution, whether that's against Congress or a perjury prosecution in federal court, or lying to the FBI for that matter, which is another separate charge that could be levied against someone. That's a very different thing from your lawyer just simply being out there floating all this stuff for public consumption on Twitter. All that said, it very much does sound like Devin Nunes is in a boatload of trouble right now. And I will just add, there's like yet another breaking news story this morning about Nunes paying for all sorts of swag and Boston Celtics tickets and, events, using taxpayer funds that should lead to yet another investigation. Now, I want to remind you all, there was an investigation into Devin Nunes last year that went nowhere. There is now another planned investigation, ethics investigation into Devin Nunes on the Hill. That's leaving aside the potential criminal liability that he may be up against, given his potential co-conspiracy here. We'll see what comes of it. I personally am disappointed that we didn't see more out of the ethics investigation into him last year, but that doesn't mean that something won't come from this. It also doesn't mean, by the way, that this investigation that's ongoing in the Southern District of New York into Rudy Giuliani, through which Parnas and Fruman have been indicted, might not also wrap up Devin Nunes if one of the things that Parnas has turned over is videotape of Devin Nunes conspiring to engage in campaign finance fraud. So we'll see. There's a lot more many more dominoes that could fall here with regard to Devin Nunes. But again, the breaking news story about this stuff, the Giuliani tapes, Nunes working with Parnas, the issue, and by the way, there was an earlier breaking news story about this with regard to Parnas organizing events with Devin Nunes. I mean, the layers of this are now getting kind of fairly thick. We'll have to wait and see what happens with this. Again, I want to remind you all that in an ordinary circumstance where we had a fully functioning Department of Justice and the norms hadn't already been so completely eroded over the course of time in this administration, this would have resulted in Devin Nunes resigning instantly. The fact that it hasn't says a lot about how far we've fallen from the standpoint of expectations and norms and protocol inside the halls of justice as well as the halls of Congress. So again, things to know about, things to be aware of, a lot more coming on that. Okay, we had a huge chunk of fallout over the weekend with regard to Trump's pardoning of several military war criminals, one of which is this Navy SEAL who, it's very hard for me to talk about this stuff because I find it so profoundly upsetting. One of them involves the Navy SEAL who shot a teenage girl for fun as a sniper, a teenage hijabi Muslim girl for fun as she was walking by the beach outside of the place where he was stationed. He also engaged in various other acts that are without question crimes against humanity. He was pardoned by the president last week. The Secretary of the Navy then signaled that he would resign if he was not allowed to discipline this particular Navy SEAL in the ways that he thought were appropriate to maintain discipline in the Navy. President Trump apparently then gave a direct order to the Secretary of Defense, Mike Espy, to then order the Secretary of the Navy to restore the status of this Navy SEAL, and that caused the Secretary of the Navy to resign. The resignation letter is a thing to behold, by the way. Again, this was flagged last night by quite a number of ex-military folks who follow all of this, including Malcolm Nance, that the letter itself explicitly mentions that the direction of the Navy now diverges from the intentions of the president. And, I will just tell you, in addition to the kind of like moral and legal ramifications of this, there are several chain of command ramifications to this that are very serious. One of them is that, if you cannot maintain discipline within the ranks of the military, all bets are off. So one of the big concerns here is about the message that this sends down the chain of command inside our military about what is and is not acceptable conduct in the course of military conflagrations, war, even just military service, frankly. The other side of this has to do with who's going to follow orders, right? Because if the Secretary of the Navy has, attempted to defy the president, as rightly he should have, by the way, let me just point this out. What he did was technically kind of like a legal mutiny. There is illegal mutiny, and then there is kind of legal mutiny, which is like, we're going to take control of what we need to take control of here. It wasn't until the direct order came from the president that the Secretary of the Navy basically had no choice. But one of the things that's of concern here is obviously that if, your commanding officer gives you an order not to do something and you don't follow it, again, the discipline and the order that is needed inside the military to effectively protect the country and also to assure that our military is stable is gone. And then, of course, you have the issue of what happens if people don't respect the commander-in-chief. This is more about the office of the presidency, right? For Trump's purposes, it could end very badly for Trump, because assuming that, he is impeached or he is voted out in 2020, should he opt not to leave office, he's not going to have the military behind him. And, by the way, I'll just add one other thing here. I think that, all this conversation about a coup, you don't usually have a coup if you don't have the military behind you. So he is alienating everyone at this point. Again, this is one of the things about where we started at the top of the broadcast about him staying inside the White House residence, not being out in public, not being around trusted advisors, people who could, fundamentally say to him, you can't do this, right? He's now in a situation where he's fundamentally losing everybody. And that doesn't bode well for him, for his position. But I'll also just add that from the standpoint of, again, military norms, the norms of the functioning of our government, the fact that the president is supposed to be the commander-in-chief of the military, this entire situation is a fiasco. And, I personally, I'm just, as someone who used to do human rights litigation, who has seen the impact of war crimes up close, I'm really profoundly disturbed, not just by the pardons, which are obscene, but also by the subsequent devolution of the military chain of command, because the Navy knows that they have to be able to sanction war criminals in their own ranks. And the refusal of the president to allow the Navy to do that, resulting in the resignation of the Secretary of the Navy, is really bad. I mean, that's the understatement of the year. Really bad for the state of our national defense. So, I have very serious concerns about it in general. And I don't know anybody who doesn't, again, it's a very dangerous precedent on about 3 different levels. All right. Rick Perry gave an interview over the weekend where he said that Trump was the chosen one and that God has always used imperfect people. For those of you who have not yet watched The Family on Netflix, I very much encourage you to go watch it, because it informs where these comments are coming from. Yes, I'm just going to say this because it's obvious, and I've said it before and I can say it again. Yes, it's a cult. The people who are still behind Trump right now are in a cult. And, this is one of the reasons why, when we get to some of your other questions, that are coming up, why we see such an unwillingness to deal with reality. It's very disturbing and very scary. All right. So we learned also toward the end of last week, this relates to the last point that I just made, that there was a briefing given to the Senate, all of the Senate, but the Senate GOP as well, concerning the fact, and it was given by our intelligence agencies months ago, that this idea that Ukraine had somehow interfered in the 2016 election was a Russian op. So what does that mean? It means basically that our intelligence agencies went to the Senate and said, those of you among you who are repeating this talking point that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election, not Russia, are actually willing or unwilling participants in a Russian intelligence operation to interfere, to stop Russia having to be held responsible, to eventually get to the point of lifting sanctions, and potentially to interfere in the 2020 election. What's profoundly disturbing about this is that following that briefing from our intelligence agencies, there are GOP senators who continue to parrot those talking points, not the least of whom is Lindsey Graham. So, again, when you think through what it is that is keeping people loyal to Trump right now, what is pushing people in the direction of defying our intelligence agencies, participating now knowingly in a Russian op, there are very few things that can justify that. There's compromise, there's money, there's just like total like amorality in general. Like you align yourself with Trump's sociopathy and you believe in all of his crazy ideas about immigration and his fascism, basically. Or you just don't really care about democracy and you're more interested in keeping your seat. Any one of those options is terrible. And the fact that our intelligence agencies went this far to go to the Senate and brief the Senate on the fact that the talking point had no basis in fact, in investigation, in proof that it was a part of a Russian operation to deflect from their interference in the 2016 election, and our senators continue to parrot those statements, should really disturb anyone. It's now like I some of this is sort of hard to believe in real time, but the fact that it's true, and that this has been going on now for quite a period of time without our knowledge, and while we've been in impeachment hearings, it is really disturbing. Again, it's one of those times where words sort of fail me. So that news also broke over the weekend. Very, very disturbing. All right, so let's take some questions. I had a couple of questions from you all about, what's going to happen next. So the judge in the case that is reviewing Don McGahn's subpoena to testify in front of Congress has promised a ruling by the end of today. One of the things that means is it also has implications, by the way, for John Bolton, who over the weekend, let's not forget, relaunched his Twitter feed in order to announce his own PAC. I'm not particularly interested in hearing or reading anything from John Bolton until he's under oath. But if Don McGahn is ordered to testify, which every single lawyer worth their weight knows he probably should be, because otherwise no one's going to comply with the subpoena anywhere. If he's ordered to testify, the expectation then is that Bolton will also comply. Reminder, Don McGahn's testimony, his initial subpoena was with regard to the Mueller report, the allegations in the Mueller report that he was ordered to fire Robert Mueller, and various other things related to the president's obstruction of justice with regard to the Russia investigation. My expectation is this ruling is kind of a no-brainer. And we'll see what happens by the end of business today on the East Coast, but that is coming. And, again, it has implications not just for the Mueller investigation, but also for where we find ourselves right now with regard to Ukraine and other witnesses, by the way, who have been subpoenaed, who have defied those subpoenas. Some of you asked what happens with people who have defied subpoenas now that it's quote unquote too late. So I want to remind you all, it's not too late. Adam Schiff has given statements as of yesterday that there may be additional witnesses. He doesn't see the need for them right now, but it's possible. Reminder as well that articles of impeachment can be filed sequentially. So, we could have articles of impeachment on Ukraine. We could then have articles of impeachment on the cover-up of the 2016 investigation into whether Russia interfered. All of that could happen down the row in order. Again, those people can be compelled to testify. For those of you wondering about consequences, of course, we've talked about this quite a bit on this broadcast over the last few years. There are contempt of court possibilities for anyone who defies a lawfully issued subpoena. That can include, through the federal courts, things like fines, up to and including being jailed. And the same is true with regard to the inherent contempt power of Congress, which could, as all of you know, have rounded these people up already and thrown them in the clink in the bottom of the congressional office building. They have not chosen to do that for various strategic reasons, but yes, there are still consequences that could exist. Now, there may come a point where if there is a given witness who is called to testify with a given part of this investigation, and articles of impeachment are filed, voted on, and carried over to the Senate, and the person is then subpoenaed to testify over there and shows up, the prior subpoena could be rendered what we would call moot, meaning that the person has already complied with the subpoena in a Senate impeachment trial. Given their testimony, there's no reason for them to be sanctioned for then not showing up in the House. But that's a stretch, right? My expectation here is that there will be some form of court enforcement or sanctioning regardless, because it's about the rule of law and upholding the rule of law, which I know, we've seen degraded over and over again, much to the, complete dismay of those of us who are, watching this as lawyers. but there should be, and my expectation is that there will be some form of punishment to those who have defied lawfully issued subpoenas. All right. Other question for today, which was a fairly significant one, is what do we do about the disinformation campaigns that are ongoing? So let me just say this. Even me, and I pay a lot of attention to this sort of stuff, as you all know, I have been quite a bit shocked over the last few days at the angles from which I've seen disinformation campaigns running. And I, kind of keep a 30,000 foot view of all of this on Twitter and elsewhere. Sometimes for my own purposes, but also because I'm really interested in just watching the patterns of what happens. So I've seen a few things over the last couple of days that are really troubling. I'll give you a couple of examples. So, one of the things that I did yesterday was I kind of like posted this, half in jest, half serious thing about Elon Musk and the launch of this new tank, solar powered tank, that has gotten horrific reviews, that already has 146,000 pre-orders apparently. And you all know, if you've been watching the broadcast for some time or you've followed me on Twitter, I am not a fan of Elon Musk, and please don't take that from the standpoint of not being a fan of green tech, because I am. I'm not a fan of the man himself for a wide variety of reasons. One of the things that was really fascinating about what happened yesterday after I posted that was I got slammed not just by, people who were like, Elon Musk is a god. There was a lot of like boy traffic on that. Let me just say that. A lot of boys with their toys. But honestly, by accounts that I could legitimately identify as bot traffic. That's really weird, right? Like the idea that, there would be bot traffic against me that was basically like, some of it was just like, bitch, shut the fuck up, like very weird, from accounts that had like 2 followers that were only open. This is the kind of thing we see with Trump all the time, right? They were only opened like a few days ago. Is very odd. And, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the nature of disinformation in general. And one of the things that we know was the objective of the Russian operations to interfere in 2016 that are ongoing right now is to sow division. And one of the things that means is that on any hot button issue, I have another example of this from over this weekend that was really fascinating to me. That where on any hot button issue, we can expect there's going to be some form of intervention to try to drum up rage. And I'm not going to get mad about people who are mad at me about Elon Musk, right? Like, I'm just going to say that. Like, I'm going to watch that on my own time and see what's going on there. I have a really profound question right now about whether or not there are any female founders in green tech who have gotten any VC funding whatsoever, because that's a whole other issue. But I'm not going to be ramped up and wound up about, being hit by a mountain of bots over Elon Musk. However, the other example of what I saw this weekend was a little bit more profoundly disturbing, which was a whole series of Elizabeth Warren supporters. By the way, I will remind you all that there's an organization called 100 Black Women that is made up of some very prominent Black activists, legislator, journalist names who have come out in support of Elizabeth Warren, including people who are currently actively campaigning for her, who have done campaign videos for her and the like. There was a really weird operation this weekend, some of which appeared to be real people, some of which really appeared to not be real people, out of the K-Hive, that appears to be either somehow, leaping off the back of Kamala Harris supporters, or coming from outside of the country. And this is, again, I'm going to remind you all, is something that we know happened explicitly in 2016, designed to drum up racial division on the left. Again, we're seeing, and all you have to do is watch the patterns on this because it's very obvious. There was a whole series of Elizabeth Warren supporters on Twitter who reported on exactly the same kind of behavior over the weekend. I even got a little bit of it on my feed from a random post about like President Warren, Secretary of State Fiona Hill, Attorney General Kamala Harris being a great lineup, where I got slammed as well for that from various sources. So one of the things that we have to think about right now when we think about disinformation campaigns and how they're being affected is that while bot traffic is one component of this, and I really do want to remind you all to go follow Christopher Bouzy on Twitter if you don't follow him already. He's built Bot Sentinel to keep an eye on bot traffic on Twitter, to identify bot-oriented accounts. He's brilliant. The work that he's doing is really important going into 2020. And there are tools that you can use there to try to identify bots on your own feed. So go check that out. But one of the things I want to say about the observers on this right now is that disinformation campaigns are not just run on bot traffic. They're also like talking points that are then taken up by real people who, for whatever reason, are invested in a particular point of view, who go out there to sow division. So, one of the things that I just want to remind people of in your own purview, in your own experiences online, that if you're anywhere, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere, and you are hit with comments that seem designed to provoke and enrage, you're dealing with like troll bot traffic, basically, because there are ways for plenty of us to have disagreements, right? Like, I've donated to Kamala Harris's campaign. I have lots of good things to say about her work in California. I have differences of opinion in some of her policies vis-a-vis Elizabeth Warren. I can have conversations with any K-Hive person. Like one of my closest friends, by the way, has been gunning for a Harris-Warren ticket the whole time. And I get why, right? I can have conversations with anybody about the policy points of this sort of stuff. That's very different from traffic online that is designed to interfere, cause distraction, cause harm, cause rifts, enrage us, fire that fight or flight response, which sometimes, by the way, causes us to shut down. And, the impact of shutting down is not getting out to the polls, or not wanting to deal with the news, or not wanting to tune into what's really happening, or questioning your own version of the truth. So all of this is, it's very important, again, and I've said this from the beginning, to be mindful of your own responses to things. This is one of the reasons why for more than 2 years on every feed that I am on, those of you who are longtime fans know this, I have called for no responses to bot troll traffic on my feed, because it generates more, but it also makes you part of the problem, because you're responding to it. It's doing things to you internally in your physiognomy that's like should worry you. There's all sorts of ways that each of us has an individual responsibility right now with regard to disinformation. But let me just say a couple of other things about this from the standpoint of where we are. As with, the way that disinformation campaigns are designed to work, there are levels to this, right? There are systemic levels where, like, we know that there are disinformation campaigns being run by Russian intelligence against us right now. The 2016 never stopped. It's ongoing as we head into 2020. That's a problem that can only be really fundamentally handled on a mass level by the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of State working with the Department of Homeland Security. We need to have the tools out there and experts working on behalf of our government to stop election interference on every level. Both the hacking interference, the information interference, the aspects of, again, this is something that could be done, by the way. Department of Homeland Security could be investigating Facebook and their role in all of this. We learned over the weekend, by the way, that Facebook gave a loan. This is like astonishing. Gave a loan to the Trump campaign in 2016 so they could buy more ads. There are many, many levels on which, if we had a functional government, systemic responses to disinformation campaigns could be effective, or at least more effective, right? But we're not in a situation where we have any of that working on our behalf right now. State is gutted. Department of Homeland Security, we know that Kirstjen Nielsen, when she was in office in 2018, without the president's knowledge or permission, fired certain aspects of cyber defense for the 2018 election. She's gone now. We don't have any idea, what's next there. Cybersecurity Office of State is gutted. Homeland Security is doing something, hopefully, but, we don't really have any idea what it is. And it certainly isn't with the permission of the president or any of his people. Facebook has already taken their stand here, right? As we've discussed on the broadcast in the last couple of weeks, repeatedly. And so that means that at the level that we're operating right now, each of us has an individual obligation to do what we need to do to respond to this. So, let me just give you all a couple of final suggestions on this front, because we're, now at 33 minutes of this broadcast, and I know that that's a little long for some of you, but I want to tell you what I recommend that you do right now, okay? I want to recommend that you don't engage with any troll bot traffic. If somebody comes onto your feed and they seem like they're there to be an asshole, don't respond to it. Just report and block. There's no need to engage. Anything, by the way, reminder that you respond to then comes up in other people's feeds. Like if you're liking something, if you're responding to it, the algorithms are going to show it to other people. That makes you part of the problem, okay? The other thing that I just want to say about it is that where you see disinformation, without retweeting it, you can always respond. You can say, one of the things that's really disturbing me right now is I'm seeing all of these statements on the feed, which we know are false. I'm seeing too many people reporting on this particular talking point, which has been disproven by our intelligence agencies. We have a responsibility to put truthful information out there into the world, to follow truthful, verified, editorially overseen news sources that we know are reliable, and to make sure that the information that we partake in and share being the operative word here, is information that is reliable, truthful, and fact-based. So, we have a responsibility to ourselves in terms of what we ingest. We also really have a responsibility about not being part of the problem. And so my recommendation to all of you at this point is to really make sure that you are very, very careful in terms of how you respond, when you respond, and what you share on social, because it's only going to get worse. And I just want to mention this, what we're seeing right now, we're a year out from the election, 11 months. The ramp up on this is going to be significant and it's going to be dramatic. And if we don't start thinking consciously about what we're doing online right now in terms of our own behavior, it's going to get way worse. And it's going to get worse anyway, but we have an obligation right now to really set our own boundaries around it. So those are my recommendations to all of you today. This was a huge broadcast. I got through all my 10 items that were on. We'll have a broadcast tomorrow at regular time. As I mentioned on the broadcast last week, we will be off Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week for Thanksgiving. So I will see all of you tomorrow for the last broadcast of the week. However, we are doing a bonus video for our subscribers at $10 and up on de-stressing techniques that should come at you today or tomorrow. And I will look forward to seeing all of you in that. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, knock wood, we will have a reasonably peaceful Thursday. All right, much love to all of you, and I will talk to all of you tomorrow. Hang in there. All right, bye.